Hello, Tisha.
Hi, Jen.
It's Sunday for us while we're recording this.
Yeah, it's Thanksgiving weekend.
It is. It is.
Yes.
We didn't record when we normally do, and then I kept asking to push it because I went to the Lizzo concert on Friday night, and as you can probably hear, still don't have much of a voice.
Amazing.
My neighbor's daughter across the street, she was like, "Why is your voice all wobbly?" And I was like,
It's a good way to describe
"It
it.
is. I've never had it described that way before."
Yeah.
The joke was my grandmother, like years and years and years ago, she was living in North Carolina, and my girlfriend and I drove from Boston down to North Carolina to visit her, and we stopped in Washington, D.C., and spent a crazy girls in your 20s kind of night there. And typically, when I do something like that, I lose my voice. And so when we showed up at her house, she's like, "Oh, why do you have such a sexy voice?"
It's not quite what I was going for.
Sure, Graham, that's what I meant.
I'll take it.
Yeah, yeah. But there was like a lot of singing and screaming and dancing at the concert for sure. It felt like,
That's a great reason to lose your voice, Jen, because as you know, at my house, we've all been fighting COVID
yes.
and it's been super not fun. It's been super not fun. We're not having a good time over here.
I
So
bet. Yeah.
that's where we're at. Yeah.
I mean, at least you made it up to the cottage, though. Is that a good thing, or is that just out of necessity?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like having to close it up and whatever.
Yeah, the water's being turned off on Wednesday. We have to come up
Yeah.
and like close it down. So it's been rough because it's a lot of physical jobs and neither myself or my husband are 100%. So
Feeling up to it, yeah.
yeah. Anyways,
That's not fun.
it's not fun. We're not having fun. We're not having fun, but we're on the mend. So I've got that going.
Yes. Did the little one ever end up getting sick, though?
No.
So that's good.
Yeah.
At least you're not dealing with like whiny like kids while you're doing it all. Not that it's good, but it could be worse.
It could be. You're right. Yes.
Although I feel like we always say that you shouldn't say that, but
You shouldn't say that it's not fun dealing with whiny kids.
no, that it could be worse because like that doesn't make it better, right?
Yes.
You know, when like something horrible happens and someone says to you, "Oh, well, it could be worse. I know someone who blah
Yeah.
blah blah." It's like that's not helpful.
Yeah. What episode are we releasing?
We're releasing Janice's episode. And Janice is a friend that I made on Instagram because our husbands actually died around the same time.
Right.
So we kind of joined the Instagram widow community around the same time.
I love her story. I should say I love it, but yeah, she merges both of our stories in a weird way.
She is. She's like a really weird merging of both of our stories.
You know, I don't know. I feel like we walk around and we think like bad things happen to people. And like when a bad thing happens, like another bad thing couldn't possibly happen to them because like everyone's getting their equal share of bad things happening. But that is not the truth of like how things actually work.
And I think a lot of widows, especially, if it's a fast or really, I mean, I don't know, I feel like there's always trauma and death, but like in the young widows, it seems really common that once you've had this like horrible thing, this death, this loss, this complete changing of your entire world and worldview, that you're invincible.
Right.
You just do. Like I admit, like at the beginning of COVID, it's not that I didn't take it seriously, but I was like, really, the universe is not gonna like make this
That
affect
to
us
me.
that much. And
Yeah.
I mean, in that case, we have knock on wood been lucky, but you definitely there's this sense of like, nothing's gonna hurt me.
Right.
And that is not the case with Janice. But I love the
Mhm.
humor that there's a whole widows community on Instagram with people sharing content and education and grief awareness and all different kinds of things. And for me, Janice is definitely up there as like one of the more enjoyable follows in that she brings humor to it. She also like there's definitely those posts that like hit you in the gut, but she brings a lot of humor to it, which I think is just nice because traumatized people have kind of a dark sense of humor, I think,
Yeah,
anyway.
that happens, doesn't it?
It totally
Mhm.
does, right? So yeah, it's nice. So it's a good one. I'm excited for you guys to hear it, and definitely find her on Instagram and give her a follow. And another big thing is we have relaunched in a more real way a merch shop, and
Yes.
we have 10 items on there, guys. We've got everything from t-shirts to sweatshirts to mugs to notebooks to some stickers, like all different price points. It's
Yeah.
all kinds of really great stuff, designs that we came up with together, and I don't know, little things that hopefully can bring you a little bit of comfort. With the notebooks, encourage your self care, coffee mugs, not a nod to how we came up with the show,
Hmm.
all that kinds of great stuff. So we would love if you would check that out. And by shopping that is a way that you get something while you support the show. And also until October 15th, if you join our Patreon, like our new member, Dina McCrae, you will get a special limited edition exclusive for Patreon members only sticker that reads unstable like my internet.
Can I get one?
Yeah,
I
we
want
get them
one.
too.
And I know it's going on my laptop. Like I already know where I'm putting it because I love this unstable like my internet sticker.
Well, so here we go. I'm going to try to look. I don't know if I can do it while I'm recording. Yeah. So I have 3 stickers on my laptop right now, all that I got from my favorite store in Toronto, Crying Out Loud. And one says it's okay, another says be kind, and the third says empathy is my superpower. So I am a sucker for stickers on my laptop. I also have one of our logo stickers that Patreon members also get
Mm-hmm.
once you're a member for 3 months. So anyway, for $5 Canadian a month, you get video of the episodes. I actually am will be posted by the time this airs, a little thing, part of an intro conversation that got cut out that I don't know, I thought was entertaining. So I'm going to share that video over there too. A video of our
Fun.
episodes. And then we've got, in conjunction with our upcoming Bad Boyfriend Month, we've got a couple of fun Patreon exclusives from our friends over at I Did Not Sign Up for This. So
Yes.
you
Fantastic.
want to head over there. It's worth it. And 10% off our whole merch site. So there you go. But enjoy this episode and leave us a review if you can.
Welcome to the Now What Pod. I'm Tisha.
And I'm Jen. We are here today with Janice, who has been my Instagram friend for I don't know, almost 3 years probably, because I think we're both coming up onto our 3 years.
Yeah, I'm coming up on my 3 years, but I have no idea how long I've known people. Yeah.
Our stories are kind of parallel in that we're both widows, and that's how we found each other on Instagram. So Janice is a mom of 3 little ones, as far as I'm concerned. They're little. A widow, and she lives in Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
And she is here to share a story with us that is kind of peripheral to being a widow. That's not really why we asked her here, because you get all that fun stuff from me. And we're so excited to have you.
Yeah, thanks. I'm excited to be asked on a podcast to share a story that's different than my regular podcast story.
We met on Instagram. She is another strong widow, so she's hysterical and she speaks truth, and often in a funny way too.
Thank you. It's my post-widowhood personality. It's not the before me. I'm totally different now.
Yeah, that's what happens,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
But yes, we're excited to have you, so thank you. The way we kind of do it is we just let people start where it makes sense to start and kind of go from there.
I don't know where to start.
I don't know you and I don't follow you on Instagram. And you said that you have like a standard podcast story.
Yeah. So do you want the short form of that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I met my husband, Chris, when I was 20. Well, actually, I met him when I was 18. We started dating when I was 20. We went to school together, university. And we were together, my whole adult life, essentially. And we lived in the States for a large portion of our time together. And we moved home to Nova Scotia to start a family. We had our son in 2015. shortly later, our daughter. And then when I was pregnant with our third, he was diagnosed with cancer. It was a terminal cancer. And it was shortly before I gave birth, we got his diagnosis. Then I had our youngest, Mary, and he died 5 months later. So it was a very challenging time. I'm still trying to process a lot of those 6 months of his diagnosis and taking care of all of my children. And overnight, I became a caregiver to him as well, you know, with a newborn baby. When he died, I had a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 5-month-old. And it's pretty horrific. Still trying to come to terms with everything that happened during that time period. And to be honest, a lot of it is a blur and I don't remember. I think that's common with a lot of people in grief, that you don't remember large portions, but I really have no idea how I got through that. And now my children are 6, 5, and 3. And like, that's still very young, but it doesn't even compare to, like, you know, a newborn and a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. Like, it's so much easier now.
I just think, like, just being a mom to a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a newborn, it takes a lot to, like, recover from.
You have 3 under 3? Like, that's just nuts.
Right? And then you add that caregiver to your husband and his death, and then the grief and grieving children, and, like, all, like, I can't.
I can't myself.
Yeah, of course
not. I don't know. And I'm finally getting to a point where I'm able to look at it from, you know, kind of a different perspective. Like, because it will be 3 years in August. And I'm like, almost looking back on my life as, you know, as a different person now. I don't know how I did that. And in the moment, I used to not even be able to talk about this because I would just, like, completely break down and start crying. But, like, in that moment, like, my husband was harder to care for than the 3 of my children put together. Yeah. And yet, you know, I was still doing all of this. Like, I don't know, like, I did impossible things, like, truly impossible things. I was doing them, like, you know, carrying 4 people, you know, places. And that, it was really horrible. I can't say much more than it was just hard. And I don't know, like, there's no tips or advice, or you just do it because you don't have a choice. Like, you just somehow do it.
Yeah.
And it was hard, but so many, like, he's living with a terminal cancer diagnosis and making all these not demands, but, you know, like, what he wants to do for his last summer of life. You know? And yet I have to play out all of these requests. And it all fell onto me on top of trying to save his life. You know, nobody knew he was dying. Like, it just, I don't know. It's a blur of feelings and emotions. There was no acceptance that he was dying, really. I mean, it was, okay, he gets this diagnosis, he goes into chemo, and we're in fight mode. It's a lot to process in a very short period of time that you're unable to process.
I don't know if you heard, I was told early on that as parents, there's a lot of our grief that we won't process until the kids are, like, older and out of the house, because it doesn't feel, like, safe to, because as much as, I don't know about you, but, like, I let my kids see a lot, but there's still so much that you can't let them see, whether you are trying to or not, you know?
Well, I think, I don't even know if I've processed any grief. Like, I don't know if it's going to get worse. I don't know. It's kind of like, well, is this it? Like, it's confusing. I mean, there is no guidebook on all of these feelings and when you're going to feel them. And for the most part, I've just been in survival mode. There has been no time to figure. And then, I mean, COVID, a pandemic, right? Like, so Chris died in August, and then it was that March we are into COVID, and it's just I think any of the processing that I have done is not necessarily grief. It's the trauma of those months of his diagnosed period. And what I had to go through is very, very challenging for me, to the point that I don't talk about certain aspects of it and still have it. But I'm finally letting parts in, very slowly, in a healing sort of way, I guess. But no, I very shut off aspects of all of that portion of my life to survive. You still have to be a parent.
I think what's really interesting when I hear of whether it's stories like Tisha's, where Tisha was diagnosed with cancer and has been clear. And as soon as she got the clear, everyone was like, yay, party, like you're good. And that's when she started processing her things and processing all the emotions and all of it. And then when it comes to like being a caregiver for somebody who has been diagnosed with cancer and then dealing through all of that, however long that is, where you're fighting it, people don't recognize that there's trauma in those moments.
No, and
I don't think I did until like being there as Tisha's friend while she was going through it.
Mm-hmm.
It's so hard to be the person going through cancer. And then there's so many other people around who they really have no idea. One of my good friends put off coming to visit Chris, and he died. And she said, but I thought he was doing chemo. And it's like, well, yeah, but there's a misunderstanding or a lack of knowledge in general about what cancer is and the different types of cancer. And it's like this idea of what chemo even is. There's multiple different types of chemotherapy. And his chemo was palliative. He was never it was hoping to extend his life. It was not going to cure him.
Right.
But that's what so many people seemed to think. There were a lot of misconceptions surrounding Chris's diagnosis that we dealt with. And there were many people who never came to see and how hurt that made him feel. And then there were many people who regretted that after he died. And that was an awkward situation for me to be in, to be that in-between person.
I'm sure you got it all put on you, whether it was meant to be put on you, but like you have to like absorb it all.
Well, and I mean, I had people come to his funeral who never even knew that he had cancer. I mean, we had a lot going on, He was diagnosed with cancer. We had 2 young kids and I was pregnant. Yeah. Then we have a newborn. I mean, there's a lot going on in our house, and every other person's feelings and well-being was not our priority. And I had people at the funeral tell me they were upset with Chris. And how hurt that they were, that he died without telling them that he was dying. And
the audacity.
It really truly made me aware of how selfish a lot of people are. And when somebody is, faced with a diagnosis, all of the comments that come out of the woodwork and the things that people say. So more to my story, 18 months after Chris died, I was diagnosed with cancer, and it was advanced cervical cancer. And I can go more into that. But it was like, once again, I noticed the selfishness in people well, you can't die because these are all the things that I want to do with you when you don't die. And it's like, well, what I want to do when I don't die. It was really like an awareness moment for me. And I think we're probably all like that to a degree. How does somebody else's hardship affect me almost?
But there's a difference between having those feelings and like spewing them out onto the person who's having the hardship.
Sure.
Yeah, because when someone you care about is going through a difficult time, of course you have feelings about that, right?
Yes.
Of course you have feelings.
Be natural,
Yeah.
You're instantly like, oh my goodness, if this person isn't in my life anymore, then I'm not going to have this or that type of thing. But yeah, I think it really just breaks people down to like these primitive like instincts and all the way back to almost like a childhood responses.
Yeah. Well, and it's especially like saying things like that when you were dealing with your own personal
Mm-hmm.
diagnosis, because it's like, as a widow, it's like you don't have enough things that you're thinking about with children. Like
Only thing I'm thinking about is my children. That is,
yeah,
I do not care. Yeah,
any
as
of
a
it.
widow who's already lost life, has feels like what is even the meaning of living? The only thing that I, am worried about is my children. That's it. Like almost to the point. I mean, I don't want to say like I don't care if I die, but when you're newly widowed and you're facing a cancer diagnosis, the only thing you're living for is your children. Like it's
Yeah,
truly, right?
absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also had cervical cancer and subsequently PTSD. And that goes, and like, I think that goes in part with like people not realizing that health crises can be traumatic.
yeah.
But I was never afraid of dying. That part never really entered my mind for myself. It was all about my kids. Like all of my fears were around my children.
Yes. Yeah.
It's hard to explain, but I understand what you're saying. That like you're just thinking about your kids. You're not thinking about yourself, and like
Exactly.
there was no self-pity. Like I wasn't like, oh, poor me, like I could die. No, it was all about my kids.
Yeah,
That was the only
exactly.
thing that I really ever thought about. People don't realize, and people do say stupid things, and some of it I think is just, I don't know, maybe I give people too much credit, but I think a lot of people become uncomfortable and they want to say something and they don't really know what to say, and so they
Mm-hmm.
end up saying things like, well, you can't die because we're planning, I want to go here with you next summer.
There are the people who are like, well, when you're all done treatment, we're going to do this and do this and do that. And I'm like, okay, where are you now? Like,
I kind of need you right now.
it's so similar. Like going through cancer has, so I used to like say things pertain to just like the widowhood side of things. Like, people suck. This is how they act. And it's surrounding grief. They're uncomfortable, but it's not. Now I've had cancer and people do the same thing. It's all hard things. People want to avoid it. They don't want to talk about it, and they don't know what to say. And it's, yeah, you lose friendships, they move. It's all the same.
Regardless.
Hardship is like hard times, and people don't want to think that your life could happen to them.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, can you take us through? So, it was like a year and a half after Chris?
Yeah. So Chris died at the end of August of 2019. We went into the pandemic in 2020. It's all a blur.
I know.
And then, so that was 2020. And then 2021 in January, like 2 weeks into January, I started having some symptoms. And I was having unusual discharge, which was just extremely thin and watery. And if you Google that, it doesn't really come up as a symptom. But once I joined the Facebook groups it might have been like uterine cancer actually that I joined first, because I had clear paps. So, and I just had a baby. I had 3 babies and never missed a pap, and those were all clear. So I don't think my mind went to cervical cancer to begin with, but I joined, and I kept seeing people talk about this watery discharge. So right off, I was like, there's something wrong. And the quantity of it was too much to be something else. The first few days I was like, what is this? What is going on? And then I thought my pelvic floor had finally fallen out and I was just peeing my pants, but no, it wasn't urine. And that's when I started trying to get help. And I was told that it was just hormones. I had been through so much. And so I think across Canada, we're having issues with healthcare, but in Nova Scotia specifically, I think it's like epidemic levels, really. So I think we have about 1 million people here, and over 100,000 people do not have a family doctor. And my husband did not have a family doctor when he got cancer. And my family doctor had just retired in December, and this was now January, and I could not get help. The walk-in clinics were not operating in a walk-in fashion because of COVID. I was really struggling to find someone to help me and to not dismiss my symptoms. Now, my doctor was unusual in the fact that she worked, an extra year and a half or so than she had planned to wait for somebody who was moving from the UK to come and take over her practice. And then that got delayed because of COVID. But that woman had not arrived yet, or her license had not come through. Anyway, so I'm still here in this position without a family doctor. And that's what's happening nonstop here, is that all the family doctors are of retirement age, and we have a growing population, and it is just wild. Like, so many people do not have a doctor. So it's very hard to get help. So the woman who was supposed to be my doctor, eventually her husband had also been here and saw that I had been to the emergency room and took me on and called me. And I really feel like you saved my life, because this was, by the time he was getting things done, it was probably about March, but I was finally having help. So I ended up calling 911 in the middle of the night in February, because I was bleeding so heavily. Shortly after the watery discharge, then I started having blood as well. And then I was having very large clots, and they were getting bigger and bigger. And I was told that that was still hormonal, and I probably just needed an IUD. And I'd been through so much stress, all of that, right?
And hormones are the solution to any women's issue. Like, if a woman is having any type of problem with her health,
it's hormones.
It's hormones.
And we're going to give you some form of birth control, because that's how we prescribe hormones.
Yes.
To help you.
Yeah. No, for real. But I was still looking at like an 18-month-long wait to get that.
Yeah.
And I was just like beyond myself. And I know all of this time, I'm telling everybody I have cancer. And maybe I do have health anxiety. Maybe I am going straight over the top. But like, I did my research. I'm in all of the cancer Facebook groups, and I'm like, that's me. That's me. I know that I have cancer. I just didn't know it was cervical. So I'm to the point where I'm literally birthing clots into my hands and carrying them home so I can dispose of them in the sink, like while I'm driving.
Oh my God.
It was just like fist-sized clots. And still, it was normal. Lots of women have bleeding and heavy bleeding in between periods. Maybe I'm like perimenopausal or whatever. I cannot. The clots that I was having, please, like, really, is there anybody out there? Like, the doctors are telling me it's normal. Like, is there another woman who has bleeding like this? Like, is this actually normal? Because I can't imagine. For me, it was not my normal. I knew that. And so after I had my first son, I needed to be resuscitated. And I woke up in the middle of the night. I was going to the toilet multiple times a night to like pass these clots into the toilet instead of into the bed. And I passed a clot, and I immediately like started to like vomit, and I was passing out. So I called 911 because it was the exact same way that I had felt when I coded after. It was like 15 minutes after I gave birth to my son. I like just, my heart stopped, and like I coded. I had to be resuscitated. And I'm like, if I had a husband, maybe it wouldn't have been my reaction, but it's like 2:00 in the morning.
And you're alone.
I have 3 children who are too young to do anything. I could be dying right now. Like, it was just, I don't have a moment to even think about this. If the same thing's happening after that happened after I had Lewis, like, I need to call right now. So I ended up going to the emergency. Called my mom, was like, I just called 911, get over here. And she came, and then I went in an ambulance, which was its own set of traumatic, like PTSD type moments after watching your husband leave in an ambulance and lying to my children about it all and not wanting them to see any of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's filled with triggers. And I end up in the same emergency room that my husband was in when he was diagnosed with cancer. It was like horrible. I'm like, here it is. I'm going to be told I have cancer and I'm dying. Anyways, I get turned away and told there's nothing wrong with me and even told not to come back.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So the bleeding doesn't stop. Like, no, there's nothing wrong. And they gave me a referral to gynecology, and it was going to be like a 2-year wait to get into them with the COVID backup and all of that. So finally, I did get this new doctor who had me immediately in the next day for an ultrasound. And I found out that there was a mass at that point, but I still didn't know any of the details. And I had pieces of tumor falling out of me by the time I saw an oncologist and was diagnosed. And he didn't even need to look to tell me I had cervical cancer. So I had a tumor that was 9 by 7 centimeters, like so large, hanging off the end of my cervix. It was like falling out of me, and pieces were falling out of me. And nobody that had examined me up until that point had seen it. And I strongly feel like they saw my anxiety and my panic and my widowhood instead of a massive tumor that I could feel with my fingers. Nobody would listen. And here I am.
I think there's also just such a lack of training around women's health.
Yeah. So many stories like mine that it's really angering and frustrating. But funny enough, it was the women who just seemed to dismiss me more than the men, to be quite honest.
Well, women aren't taught about women's health either. It's not just the men who aren't learning about it.
Yeah.
Women aren't even taught about their own bodies. Tisha has girls, and the part of your private parts that kids touch and talk about, everybody calls it a vagina, and it's not a vagina.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It seems laughable that it's your vulva, but it is.
I've caught a lot of flack for teaching my kids that it's a vulva. This is why Jen's bringing this conversation up. My children call it their vulva.
Yeah.
And
because that's what it is.
But I think a lot of people don't even teach that it's called a vagina.
Oh, no.
Which is crazy.
It's called some nickname.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So if we can't even talk about it in our home, it's it trickles down, right? So if you can't talk about it in your home, and women go all this time without even being able to refer to things properly, and then they end up working in an ER or whatever, even if you've been through all of your training, which is lackluster anyway in that area, they don't even know their own bodies.
Yeah. Yeah.
You've got the whole other issue of, wait times and not being able to get in to see a doctor and not having a family doctor. So you don't have someone that you're consistently seeing who knows you. And I mean, there's so much going on here.
I was dismissed so many times by people that I often wonder, what the outcome would have been if I wasn't a widow. Because there is a fire in me because of my children that it's I think as a mother, when you're in that busy, when my husband is alive, we're working, we've got these young kids, you're just going, and mothers never really prioritize their health or put themselves first. And I'm not saying that I do that much of a better job now, but it's different. I am so aware in every feeling and every thought. It's maybe there's something wrong with me, and I'm a heightened awareness about my health. And instead of just brushing off those initial symptoms, probably nothing and probably going to go away, I advocated and I never stopped. And when they told me my cervix looked normal, that, I'm in the emergency room. I came there by ambulance and I'm what? My cervix looks normal. Are you for real? You don't see anything. And I requested an ultrasound as well, actually, and was denied, which I'm angry about. I'm angry about it all, but it's kind of in the past a bit more now. But
Yeah.
there was no reason to give me an ultrasound because there was nothing wrong with me. But I mean, I knew I didn't leave there feeling relief. I left there thinking, I don't have cervical cancer. I have something else. I knew there was still something wrong.
There's a lot of similarities in our stories. My cancer was earlier than yours.
Mm-hmm.
But I had some symptoms, Dr. Google. I was like, I have cervical cancer.
Mm-hmm.
I made an appointment right away. I'm driving to the appointment. I call my husband. I'm crying. I'm like, I'm convinced I have cervical cancer. I was freaking out. And he's like, you're not supposed to look on Google, blah, 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 which is true. And I went to the doctor and he looked at my cervix and he was like, your cervix looks perfectly normal and healthy. It's similar to you. I had children, like my children were 2 and 4 when I was diagnosed. So people had been up in my business and I'd had my pap smears and all of that. He sent me for an ultrasound. Actually, nothing showed up on the ultrasound, but my pap came back abnormal, but it wasn't showing that I had cancer. So could be anything. But as soon as I got to a gynecologist, she took one look at my cervix and she was like, there's something on your cervix. But I'm like,
wow.
But I saw my family doctor 2 weeks ago who told me my cervix looked perfectly normal. And I've had pap smears that were perfectly normal. So how do you go from having normal paps to cancer? And, the gynecologist didn't want to comment on perhaps why my doctor hadn't seen it. She's like, well, I don't want to, I can't say I wasn't in the room, but I'm like, they just don't know. They just don't know. Because I had 2 growths on my cervix. They were both over a centimeter. One of them was 2 centimeters. Like, they were there. They were visible. She took one look, was like, so there's something on your cervix. So it's interesting. I was like, how do they not know? And I think, they don't know. And also I think being a young woman in good health, like I'm in my 30s, I'm healthy.
Yeah.
I don't smoke. I'm not, I don't do drugs. I'm average weight.
Yeah.
So I think I come in and I have these symptoms and I appear to be healthy in their mind and live a healthy lifestyle. So they're like, oh, there can't be anything wrong with you. And you do, I guess, you do have to kind of fight.
Yeah. I mean, how many times had I had people up in there while I was, having my last child? So that would I don't know. They say it's super slow growing and should have been something there. Maybe they didn't see it, but the woman in the emergency room just didn't examine me properly or didn't even look, because there's no way you don't see a ball like this big off the cervix. She just didn't examine
There
me.
shouldn't be something that size hanging around up there.
I could feel it. And it got that it was I have pictures of chunks of tumor in my hand.
Oh my gosh.
I'm sorry to
No.
on your podcast.
No, that's okay.
What is wrong with people? But just more so why is no one listening is the thing, right? Because I was a widow. I don't know. I know it's women's health in general, but I kind of throw that widow card in there a little. Well, I'm a hysterical widow.
You're a hysterical widow and you're a cancer widow. So obviously you're going to think everything is cancer. And what do you know?
And just being in the emergency room was I presented as a very high anxiety patient in that time.
Imagine that.
I can't even imagine. Obviously, you're going to be anxious being back there and thinking that there's something seriously wrong with you.
I thought I was relieved that I was finally going to walk out of there with the answers that I had been dealing with for, I don't know, this was Well, I guess it was only like 6 weeks at that point or so. It was February that I went. Yeah, so it hadn't been that long at that point, but I was like, finally, I'm going to have answers. I'm going to walk out of here knowing like what is going on, and I'm going to be told I'm dying.
But at least I'll know.
But it was still, yeah, nothing's wrong with you. You are just crazy. And then, the other component was I just kept being prescribed anxiety meds. And I ended up needing 3 blood transfusions. I was at the point where I was like, I don't care about the cancer. Get this pain in my chest gone. And they're like, oh, we'll deal with that after we deal with the cancer. And it's like, I can't take this feeling in my chest. And it was because I was operating on half the normal amount of blood you're supposed to have. And my heart was literally beating out of my body. So once I got a bunch of blood transfusions, that pain went away. But nobody listened to that symptom either. That was just anxiety, right?
It sounds like anxiety. You would have reason to be anxious.
But it's also I was having major health issues. And I'm trying to keep up with 3 kids. I'm exhausted, but you would expect that. You're grieving. But it's literally I was getting to the point where I couldn't walk up the stairs. And so after I had my son, I had lost so much blood, I couldn't even walk for a week. And I wasn't allowed to go to the bathroom. I wasn't allowed to shower. I wasn't allowed to do anything. And I was operating at less blood than that on a daily basis, taking care of 3 kids before I got diagnosed. Wow. I mean, it had been more gradual, a drop in blood, so I was accommodating for it. But I had just bought a skipping rope and I had all this plans because I'm like, I can't do anything. I am so out of shape. This is so bad. I was like, what is wrong with me? I can't even walk up this hill. I need to do something about this. And I kept telling people that I was sick. I didn't feel well. I was like, there's seriously something wrong with me.
Obviously, if something is wrong with your body, it feels like having some sort of anxiety about that is a natural byproduct.
True. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So why are we just dismissing that when we know, it feels like people are finally starting to, maybe not in the medical profession, I don't know, recognize that anxiety is a legitimate thing. But why can't we look at that and make sure that there's nothing else going on that's maybe causing that anxiety?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know, but kind of how anger is a secondary emotion, right? Maybe anxiety as it relates to your health could be a second, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know anything, but it's really frustrating that you can just dismiss what turned out to be something seriously wrong with you health-wise.
Well, I could even go back and talk about my husband in definitely the 4 months prior to his diagnosis. But I mean, if I wanted to stretch it out, I could probably go back a year or 2. He was a different person. So he had very advanced cancer when he was finally diagnosed of the bile ducts in his liver, cholangiocarcinoma. But he had so much stress and anxiety in his chest and depression and this feeling, he started taking Ativan all the time. It's just so not his personality. He was the easygoing, life of the party. I'm the anxious person, but he changed his demeanor so much. And he was always uptight and impatient and had anxious feelings in his chest. And he was telling doctors about that. And one of the first questions that he asked all of the oncologists when he got diagnosed is it related to anxiety, or can it make my mood different? Or nobody cared. They're like, I don't know, because doctors, it's I'm a liver specialist and I look at your liver. There is no bigger awareness about your body and how it operates. But I mean, he most definitely had changes in his body other than just physical as a result of the stress his body was, under before he knew he had cancer.
Yeah.
So anxious.
It makes sense, right? It's all connected.
Yeah. Yeah. But doctors don't look at it like that at all. No. Specialists, and they don't even care to make those connections that we can sit and obsess about.
Where does your health stand now?
Good, but like just wait and see. So after I got my diagnosis, was not eligible for a hysterectomy because of the size of the tumor. And everybody had assumed it had spread based on the size. It was one of the largest tumors they had ever seen, but it did not. So that was fantastic news. I could not believe that it had not spread into like the vaginal wall or lymph nodes or any of that, because I was convinced it was in my lungs. I was like, I'm done. I can't breathe, all of that anxiety. But no, my PET scan was clear in all other places of my body, which was also like, here's my health anxiety speaking, but like I don't have brain cancer. I don't have, all these like
other things that you could have
other
had.
things that you worry about, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, well, at least, and then I'm also like, well, if I had something starting somewhere else, the chemo would have taken care of that. And it's like all these, like, that's where the mind goes. Like for me, anyways, I don't know if that's everybody, but I did chemo. I did 25 rounds of external radiation and then brachytherapy, which is internal radiation. I did 4 of those, which is pretty nasty. And I've had 2 follow-up scans that still showed residual tumor, but radiation works after you finish treatment. It's still working. So maybe it's gone now. Visually, everything has been looking better and better as I go it was like every 6 weeks. Now it's like every 12 weeks. And I actually canceled my appointment to go away to PEI last week or whatever. So next week I have an appointment. But I expect good news, but it's just kind of a wait and see. So I just passed 1 year since I finished treatment, which is like a big milestone, but 2 years is the really big milestone. So they say there's like a 50% chance of recurrence within the first 2 years, but like the further you get out, the less that is. So, maybe it's only like 25% now or something. I'm not sure, but it does go down the further you get out.
Yeah,
So
we will definitely be thinking of you next week. And I super wish you good luck at that appointment. I hate those appointments.
Yeah.
I hate those appointments. And I've had lots of good news, but every appointment is just, I think I'm fine until like I'm like, sometimes it's the night before. Sometimes it's on the drive there. Sometimes it's when I'm actually at the appointment. But I'm always like, the last appointment I had, I was like, I'll go by myself. I don't need anyone to come with me. And then I'm just sitting there by myself going, why am I doing this alone right now? Why didn't I ask somebody to come with me? Like, we recorded an episode with someone named Jen. What do we call that? I think it was Green. Like Jen's story of trusting her body. And your story has so many elements of hers, although in her case, she actually had suffered a heart attack. So very different medical situation, but similar in the sense of just not feeling heard and being dismissed by the medical profession. And we need to do better. I don't have a solution, really. I'm not a doctor, but I think it's important that we have these conversations and raise awareness and like let other women know that sometimes you're going to be dismissed just because you're a woman, and sometimes you're going to be told your issue is hormonal. And if you aren't buying it,
speak up.
You need to fight. And I think it's very difficult for a lot of women to do that because
it's like against how you're taught to be as a girl and a woman.
Well, right? As a girl, and you're supposed to like respect the authority of the doctor, and the doctors like know everything. Yeah. So if the doctor says it's fine, then you're fine, right? Like you're not supposed to question the doctor.
Don't mess with a widow with young kids, though.
Yeah, it's true. Like, exactly. It's there.
Right? She's not another strong widow for no reason.
Oh,
she proved it even more, though. She had that before this, though.
Right.
I mean, my symptoms did get pretty extreme, but otherwise, I think I would have just like dismissed things a lot easier than I did. I mean, I didn't stop. I didn't even, second guess myself once. It was like, no, somebody needs to listen to me. I need to get to the bottom of this because I have kids. And, there's
no one else.
There is nobody else.
Yeah.
It's the friggin' middle of a pandemic. And I don't even know what to say because it was just like another bump in this life. Like, I'm still very much in the widow community. Like, sometimes I feel like I can't necessarily even, relate to the cancer community that's on Instagram, even though I'm very much a part of it. Or like within the cervical cancer community, like I went through a lot more than many of these people. I don't mean I went through more, but like my treatments were more invasive. But like, I don't relate to it. It was just so insignificant compared to your husband dying. Like, so many people talk about it being very traumatic. And I mean, yeah, it was. But like,
you were already traumatized.
Walking into chemo was not traumatic because I had to get chemo. It was because I said, oh, hey, nurses, guess what? I'm back.
For me now.
Exactly. And being like, the first time I had to walk in there, they tried to sit me in the chair that my husband had sat in his last chemo. And I was like, losing my shit. But it's like, that's what the trauma was about, not because it's like I've already been.
We had this whole other layer going on.
I don't know. And then like so many people talk about the internal radiation. It's extremely invasive. It was the second time I went was more painful than having a child, which I did unmedicated. I mean, like it's very traumatic in certain ways. But you know what? I loved every minute of lying there in a hospital bed away from my children, being given drugs. Like, as sick as that sounds, it was a friggin' vacation. Like, I know that sounds horrible, but it's the only time I've been away from my kids since I had them 7 years ago.
Definitely was like, there were times in the pandemic that I was like, maybe I need to get COVID so that I can go stay in a hospital and someone will stay with them.
I think that.
So I can imagine how that would have felt that way, because especially from the relentlessness of a loss and grieving and parenting grieving children and doing all and having kids as little as yours were, to then being told you have to isolate with them, to then finally, it's this horrible thing that you're doing, but it's quiet and nobody is bothering you.
And there's not even any guilt.
Yeah.
Sure, I could go to a hotel room, but I would feel guilty about not being with my kids, or I'd be worried about them or whatever. In the hospital, I literally had these like rods stuck inside of me. I had to lie flat on my back. You could not move for like, I don't know, a day and a half. It was painful. I had like a constant morphine they were giving me. But it was great at the same time. Like, it was horrible, but it was, like so many people just talk about how traumatic it was. And I mean, I was already traumatized.
You were traumatized.
Like, I was traumatized. You couldn't do anymore. I'm just like, I give up kind of at that point. Like, it couldn't get worse. So the first time I went, so they have to put you to sleep to insert the radiation rods and stuff like that. And I was full-blown panicking about it because my husband had been intubated and in the ICU for 13 days before he died. And I could go to sleep, but for some reason I didn't realize I had to be intubated when I was put to sleep until I just didn't make the connection until like the week before, and I was a mess over it. So that was really challenging for me, like that side of it. But then when I finally got to leave the hospital, they had to kick me out, like, because I'll go and roll over and go back to sleep, have a nap. Like, I promise, I'm calling somebody to pick me up. Like, I don't know. It's just, it's a mess. Like, it's crazy. And I mean, I did it all by myself.
Because whoever was extra had to take care of your kids.
But even during COVID, you couldn't have an extra at certain periods of all of that. Like, I couldn't have somebody come to chemo with me or, nobody was there when I got my diagnosis. So I was just there alone. And I go home to my kids and be like, yeah, mom, I got cancer, you know, like,
Yeah.
when I say those things out loud, but maybe I am affected by it, but I just bury it. But I'm not, I'm just like, whatever, another crap thing to the pile.
Well, I mean, I think that's it. I think when you've been through as much as you have, if you haven't been knocked down yet, you know, like it's not going to knock you down.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you're unaffected. I just think it means, you know, I'm dealing with some more pressing feelings, emotions, things in my body right now than this.
Yeah.
And either it will kind of fold in with all of it, or it'll come up for me some other time. Like I just,
Like,
yeah.
I did cry. I know I cried once, but I never cried about it. It was just like, are you kidding me? Of course.
This is actually happening. Yeah.
Because I can remember, what's her name? Like the enlightened widow. There's a few other widows, right, that have cancer or have had cancer. And I can remember talking about them to like my sister and being like, oh my God, like, can you imagine, like, how is this possible if this happens? And then it's like, surprise, it's me too. You know, it's,
And then it happened to you.
Yeah.
You're like, oh yeah, this really can happen to like real life people.
yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's such a layered story, and I think there's so much that somebody could kind of glean from it all. But specifically on the medical side of it, for you personally, what would you hope that somebody would take away from it? Like, obviously, they're not going to have that same fire that you did from being a young widow.
The widowhood, but
yeah, but like, how can we maybe help someone channel that if they don't have that?
well, I think one thing to the cervical cancer, like awareness side of things, is that a negative PAP does not mean that you don't have cancer or cancerous cells.
Truth.
Yes.
Truth.
I saw a statistic recently. I don't know, it might have just been for the US, but it was something like 33% of cancer diagnosis had like clear PAPs. So I mean, like, I'm running in the cervical cancer circle. It's so many people have the same story. So, I mean, I was like, they were like, well, you have cancer. And immediately I said, but my PAP was clear. You have to realize that a PAP is just a very small sample of cells, and it doesn't really mean that you're cancer free from that, or, you know, don't have precancerous cells.
That doesn't mean don't get a pap smear.
No. And what I'm
Don't get the pap smear.
is that no child or family member of mine will be going every 3 years or whatever it is now.
Yeah, 3 years. They changed it from every year to every 3 years.
Hell no. No. Not a chance. So my mom actually had precancerous cells and had a LEAP procedure. So that's why I just, like, cut off, you know, a part of the cervix. And they told her she was good to go every 3 years even. And it's
What?
no, like, no way. So my sister now is like going every year. I don't know. So not saying go against the medical system, but there is no way I will ever return to 3-year PAPs. And I wouldn't recommend that for anybody, because I had been doing it. I had one with each of my pregnancies. So that was less than 3 years or whatever.
Right.
I had like 3 kids in 3.5 years. So I had like 3 PAPs in like 4 years, and they were all fine.
No.
Yeah. I used to get them every year because that's what it was. And then you started getting them every 3 years, as long as you've always had clear PAPs.
Yeah.
I had always had a clear PAP. So when they changed the way that they fund PAP smears, because public health, then I was going every 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Even having said that, it's interesting because that 3 years prior had a clear PAP, because I actually probably had precancerous cells that were not picked up. And I also had a child in that time. And I remember the gynecological oncologist was like, we're not looking. Like, she's like, when you are giving birth, like, you think we're looking at your cervix. We're not really paying attention. We're not looking for cancer. Cause I'm like, how could this happen? Like, how did nobody see this? She's like, we're not looking. She's like, yeah, like our hand is in there and we're feeling for the opening of your cervix, like how dilated you are, but we're not actually checking you for cancer or actually looking at your cervix.
Well, but when you go to
I'm
the
like, how are you
freaking
not
ER
looking at
and you're
cervix? You're looking at my
bleeding
cervix.
like crazy and you're asking them to look, they should at least look.
Yeah, really.
Right?
And they didn't for her. So like,
Well, they did, but they didn't see anything.
Really. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't really.
I'm like, you didn't look well enough. But like, even when, okay, so maybe they're not looking for cancer while you're giving birth, but like I had people like, you know, we all get what, the GBS swab and whatever else. I can't even remember. It's been too long.
People are up and in there before and after you're actually laboring.
Exactly. That's my point. Like they are looking at the health of that area while you were pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Yeah. But I also think that mine was not as slow growing as they say.
It feels like it couldn't have been if it was that big.
That's what I like. Yeah. I mean, it was massive. It was massive.
Like the size of a plum. Bigger.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, like, how did nobody see anything? If it was as slow growing as they say it is, how did nobody never see anything in all of that time? Like, I think they say it takes 5 years to go from precancerous to cancer cells. And then, you know, once it's like cancer, I don't know, a long time. And then, but I here's a whole other theory, but I think grief caused mine, you know, almost like not even so much grief, but that period of time that my husband was sick, the extreme stress that was caring for him and the children. I think that my immune system was completely shot. I don't think I slept for 6 months. You know, I took care of people all day and then all night I was at the computer trying to cure cancer, earning my like honorary PhD in cholangiocarcinoma. I swear I know more than his oncologist did. I was exhausted, and I kind of believe that was the opportunity that those cancerous cells cold, and that it rapidly multiplied, which also could be backed up. So nobody thought that I would respond to treatment in the way that I did. And my tumor also shrank very quickly. So the quicker something shrinks, generally the faster growing it was. You know, like those cells are rapidly dividing.
Oh, okay.
So they're killed just as quickly, or they can't divide anymore once you start radiating it and killing those cells. So, I mean, it's all a theory, but like, I really do grief and widowhood played, you know, another layer aspect into my cancer diagnosis potentially. Like,
well, I mean, I don't know if I remember seeing at one point on like International Widows Day or something, like that being widowed is one of the most stressful things. It's like the stressful thing that you can ever go through in life. And I mean, there have been studies at what stress can do to the body. The last episode we released last season was with a woman who was talking about mindfulness and ancient wisdom and meditation and her mom's Lou Gehrig's disease. And I don't remember what book it was that she referenced, where there was a whole chapter on how, because her mother lived with trauma too, and then how that can contribute to something like Lou Gehrig's disease.
Well, there are studies too, like, you know, there's a higher, the widowhood effect, right? The higher incidence of death, you know, after becoming widowed. And there are studies and the higher risk of accident, you know, a car accident, you know, that stuff kind of, you know, you can see how that happens. That makes sense, you know, like but there are also statistically higher chances of getting cancer, higher chances of heart attacks, all those things. I mean, so that is fact, or, you know, that has been proven in studies. But I mean, it's not just like, for us too, widowhood isn't just the highest stress. I mean, you get points for every one of those along there. So having a child is stressful. You know, we have bought a house. That's a stressful event listed on there. Illness, you know, like all of those things. So, I mean, in my case, and I think many of our cases, I mean, widowhood wasn't the only stressful event that you're going through at the same time, right? And a lot to that, the stressors of life. I mean, job, like, my husband obviously was no longer working once he was diagnosed. I stopped working to care for him. And it's just like on and on and on, right? Like, there's so many stressful events to all that. So, yeah, you know, I mean, I don't know if it caused my cancer, but I am really interested to know, like, so cervical cancer is usually caused by HPV, the HPV virus. And
which probably grows in stressful situations when your immune system is suppressed.
Well, yeah, your whole body is vulnerable.
Well, many people have it or have had it, and it usually takes like 4 years for your body to clear the virus, but it can just lay dormant in you as well. And then in stressful, like, it can take hold at, you know, any time in your life. It can be years later, and then you can develop cervical cancer from that. So, yeah.
It's crazy.
And another thing that I think people need to be aware of in Canada, I think we are making changes to this, but it's different in every country. When you have a pap smear, you are not tested for HPV. So
it's a different test. It is a different test.
It's not even available where I am.
So here in Ontario, you can get one, but it is not covered by OHIP, so you have to pay for it.
Okay. And here, after I got my cancer diagnosis, I said, so this was caused by HPV? And he said, yes. I said, well, are you sure? And he said, yes. I said, well, how sure? You know, I want the 100% sure. I want the test. We can't test that here. Like, I think it's changing, but so, I mean, yes, we can assume, because 99% of, you know, cervical cancer, I think is 97%, is HPV related, but I don't actually know if that's what caused mine, because I have never had an HPV
tested.
Which
I also didn't have the test because they told me that I already had cancer. She's like, you don't need the test. I know you have HPV. You have cervical cancer.
But you don't know.
But you don't know. But that is actually what I was told by a gynecological oncologist.
Yeah. So I kind of had a similar conversation with a gynecological oncologist.
Yeah. Interesting, isn't it?
So, yeah, but I know that I think in the UK, they also test HPV. So they're like, I could be wrong, and it's changing all the time. And when I quote stuff like this, people like attack me. But I think it's like, they've gone to like every 3 years. I think they're actually petitioning because they were going to every 4 years, but they test HPV every time you have one. So if you're HPV positive, then you go to every year or something.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Which would make sense.
Which would make sense here too.
Yeah.
I think in the States you can get HPV tests as well. I don't know. It's different everywhere. And then people, like, if I say something, it's different even with different provinces.
Yeah.
It's becoming more common here, the HPV test.
Find out what it's like where you are, wherever you're listening from.
That's just FYI. This is like simple women's health that I had to get cancer to learn.
Well, and also, I mean, I just in case, like, I'm going to be like really on the nose here, but advocate for yourself.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the moral of the story here is never stop. If your life, you will save your life. You know, like, it seems time and time again, you must advocate for yourself. Yeah. Like, I don't think, same thing happened with my husband. Like, I don't think he would have even received treatment before he died had we not. It's frustrating because it's exhausting, but you have to. You really have to, or find somebody who can do it for you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Janice, for
Thank
coming.
It was lovely to talk to you.
Thanks for listening to the Now What Pod. If you've enjoyed this episode, leave us a review. Your ratings and reviews help more people like you find our podcast.
Don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with someone you think would love it. You can find us on social media at the Now What Pod. Until next time, we're Tisha and Jen. Remember, your story matters and you do too.